The Turning Point, A Journey Through Life's Lessons. Chapter 1, Childhood, Dreams and Harsh Realities. The first memories I carry aren't of toys, school, or even birthdays. They're of my mother's tired hands. She used to return from work late. At night, her palms rough, her fingers cracked from endless scrubbing in the small factory nearby. The sound of the door creaking open at 10 p.m. was my signal Mama was home, and dinner was finally safe to be eaten. Until then, my little sister and I would sit on the wooden floor, waiting. We didn't grow up with much. The roof leaked when it rained, and winters meant shivering under two thin blankets. But as a child, I didn't notice poverty the way adults do. I had dreams larger than my stomach's hunger. At 7, I told everyone I would be a pilot. I wanted to touch the clouds, to see the world from above. My friends laughed. Their dreams were smaller, safer teacher, shopkeeper, tailor. Mine was too bold for our dusty little neighborhood. Every day after school, I'd run to the small library 2 streets away. It wasn't really a library, just a room owned by an old man, Mr. Kapoor, who let children borrow books for free if they promised to return them without dog ears. He smelled of ink and dust, but he had treasures stacked in his shelves, magazines with planes, books on explorers, and the occasional story of someone who made it out of a small town. I would sit on the cold floor, tracing pictures of airplanes, whispering to myself, one day, that's me. But reality had its own lessons. By age 10, I was working part-time at a tea stall. My father had left years before, and my mother couldn't carry the weight alone. I scrubbed cups, poured tea, and balanced trays bigger than my chest. At first, I resented it. Other kids played cricket after school, while I memorized the exact way a regular customer liked his tea. But slowly, I learned something important. Life never promises fairness. It only gives responsibility. One night, as I sat outside the tea stall, my school bag next to me, I overheard 2 men. "Poor kid," one said, watching me wipe a table. "Yeah," the other replied, "but he's got fire in his eyes. Maybe he'll go far." That stuck with me. It was the first time I realized people could see my hunger, not the hunger of an empty stomach, but the hunger to be something more. From then on, I decided, no matter how hard life pressed me, I wouldn't let it kill my dreams. Still, the road was brutal. My grades began to slip because exhaustion weighed down my evenings. Teachers scolded me for unfinished homework. I wanted to explain that I spent 4 hours working at the stall before I even touched a notebook, but pride kept me silent. Instead, I made a deal with myself. I'll work harder than anyone else, even if I get half the sleep. There were days I wanted to give up, days when rain soaked me as I ran home with books under my shirt, days when other kids mocked me for smelling of milk and tea instead of perfume and soap. But each insult carved a kind of strength into me. I was learning without realizing it. The first real lesson of life. Dreams are free, but the price of chasing them is everything you've got. Looking back, that chapter of my childhood was unfair, even cruel. But without it, I wouldn't have grown the resilience to face what came next, because life was preparing me for even bigger storms, the kind that tear apart friendships, break hearts, and make you question your worth. But in those early years, with calloused hands and tired eyes, all I knew was this: I would not remain small forever. Lesson from Chapter 1. Gratitude and resilience are born in struggle. You may not choose your starting point in life, but you can choose how fiercely you chase what lies ahead. Chapter 2. Teenage Rebellion. Choices have consequences, By the time I turned 13, the world felt heavier. Childhood dreams of flying airplanes were still there, but life had begun whispering other, harsher truths. I was no longer the small boy carrying trays at the tea stall. I was now a teenager trying to balance pride, anger, and the desperate urge to be seen as someone important. School became a battlefield, not of books and exams, but of identity. At that age, the approval of classmates seemed more valuable than the wisdom of teachers. Suddenly, it mattered how I walked, what I wore, and whether I laughed at the right jokes. Poverty, however, is a loud shadow. It follows you into classrooms. My uniform was faded, my shoes had tiny holes that let in dust, and my lunch was often just a single piece of roti. I hated being the poor kid, so I rebelled, not against my family. I didn't dare. My mother's sacrifices were too visible to disrespect. I rebelled against school rules, against teachers, against the very path that I believed was holding me down. My grades dropped further. I skipped homework. I began hanging out with boys who had the same anger burning inside them. We weren't bad kids, but we were reckless. We skipped classes, sneaked out to play cricket for hours, and tried to show we weren't afraid of anyone. For the first time, I tasted the sweet poison of attention. When I talked back to a teacher, my classmates laughed and clapped. For once, I wasn't invisible. But what felt like power was really weakness disguised in bravado. One incident changed me. It was a hot summer afternoon, and our group of boys decided to steal mangoes from an orchard on the edge of town. We ran through the fields, laughing, our shirts tied up to carry as many mangoes as possible. But the farmer caught us. He was furious, chasing us with a stick. Most of my friends managed to escape, but I tripped on a rock. The sting of his blows burned, but what cut deeper was the shame. He dragged me by the collar back to the tea stall where I worked in the evenings. In front of customers, in front of people I knew, he shouted, "Is this the boy you trust to serve?" T, a thief. My mother heard about it that same night. She didn't scold me. She didn't even raise her voice. Instead, she looked at me with eyes that carried both pain and disappointment. She simply said, "Son, if you want to be small all your life, keep making these choices. But if you want to rise, remember every decision you take builds or breaks your future." That was worse than any slap. Her words sank deep into me. For days, I couldn't sleep properly. The laughter of my friends no longer gave me joy. I began to see that rebellion without direction is destruction. I returned to school with a different mindset. I wasn't perfect, no teenager ever is, but I made a vow: if I wanted to escape the cycle of poverty, I had to stop blaming the world and start owning my actions. That realization didn't turn me into a saint overnight. I still argued, still made mistakes, still craved approval, but I learned to pause before choosing. Slowly, my grades improved. Teachers who once saw me as a troublemaker noticed the change. I didn't become the top student, but I climbed out of the failing ranks, and that small victory taught me something timeless. The choices you make in your teenage years echo far louder than you realize. One reckless step can brand you for years, but one disciplined step can open doors you never imagined. The rebellion had taught me pain, but it also carved discipline. It showed me that respect is not earned through defiance. It's earned through resilience and responsibility. Lesson from Chapter 2. Freedom without responsibility is a trap. True strength isn't about rebelling against rules. It's about choosing the right battles and learning that every action carries a price. Chapter 3: First Love and First Loss. Accepting Impermanence. I was 16 when I first understood how a single glance can change everything. Her name was Aditi. She wasn't the prettiest girl in school by everyone's standards, but to me, she was radiant. She had an easy laugh that filled the room, and eyes that carried both curiosity and kindness. For a boy like me, who had grown up in shadows of poverty and responsibility, she felt like sunlight. We met during a school debate. Competition. I was there only because my English teacher had pushed me to join. "You have a sharp tongue. Use it for something better than backtalk," she'd said. Aditi was on the opposing team. When she stood up to speak, I forgot my lines. She argued, with confidence, her words flowing like music, and though her team lost, I secretly felt like she had won everything that mattered. From that day, I found excuses to be near her. I lingered longer in the library because she liked reading novels. I volunteered for school projects just because she did. Slowly, small conversations began. She asked me about my family. I lied at first, ashamed of my tea stall job, but when she eventually found out, she didn't laugh or judge. Instead, she said, "That means you're stronger than most boys here. You already know how to handle life." Those words lit something in me. Weeks turned into months. We shared long walks after tuition, whispered jokes in class, and exchanged notebooks with doodles at the corners. For the first time, I felt seen, not for my poverty, not for my mistakes, but for who I was becoming. I began to believe maybe dreams weren't so impossible. But life, as always, had its own script. Her father was a government officer, strict and ambitious for his daughter. When he discovered our friendship, he forbade her from speaking to me. "You think you'll build a future with a tea stall boy?" he thundered, dragging her away one evening when he caught us walking home together. I still remember her tears as she looked back at me, helpless. The next day, she didn't come to school, and the day after that, she avoided me. A week later, she handed me a letter in the corridor, just one page. "I don't want to stop talking to you, but I must. Please understand. Maybe someday, when life is kinder, we'll meet again." I read that letter until the ink almost faded, but she never came back into my life. Her family moved to another city, and just like that, my first love became my first loss. For weeks, I felt hollow. Food lost its taste. Cricket felt boring. Even my dreams of aeroplanes felt heavy. It was my mother, once again, who gave me the wisdom I didn't know I needed. She sat beside me one night and said, "Son, people are like seasons. Some stay for years, some for only a few months. But every season leaves you with something: flowers, rain, or lessons. Don't cry because the season changed. Be grateful that it came at all." Her words were simple, but they struck deep. Slowly, I realized that love, especially first love, wasn't always about forever. Sometimes it was about learning how to open your heart, to feel deeply, and then to let go gracefully when life demands it. Years later, I would still remember Aditi, not with pain, but with gratitude. She had given me courage when I felt small, and shown me that kindness can heal shame. She was a season in my life, one that taught me the profound truth of impermanence. Nothing lasts forever, not love, not pain, not even failure. And that is what makes each moment precious. Lesson from Chapter 3. Accepting impermanence is one of life's hardest but most liberating truths. People, moments, and even dreams may not stay forever. Cherish them while they last, and when they leave, let them go with gratitude instead of bitterness. Chapter 4. College Hustle. Discipline over talent. A new beginning. Getting into college felt like stepping into another universe. For a boy who had grown up in a narrow lane, where neighbors borrowed salt from each other and everyone knew everyone's secrets, the sprawling campus was overwhelming. I had fought hard to get there. Countless nights of studying by dim light, hours of balancing work and school, and the determination to not let my mother's sacrifices go in vain. All of it had led me to this moment. Yet, as I stood at the gates on my first day, I felt more fear than pride. Around me, students wore branded clothes, carried expensive phones, and spoke English with ease. I felt small, again, like the poor boy with worn-out shoes. But this time, I promised myself, I won't let insecurity defeat me. I've survived worse. I'll find my place here. The shock of talent. The first semester was brutal. Classes moved fast. Professors assumed we all had strong foundations, and group projects quickly became a measure of popularity. My classmates seemed effortlessly talented. Some could solve complex equations in minutes. Others spoke fluently in debates. I, on the other hand, stumbled. My notes were messy, my English broken, and my confidence fragile. More than once, I thought, maybe I don't belong here. But then I noticed something. The so-called talented students often studied only before exams. Many skipped classes, confident that they could wing it. Some were brilliant, but inconsistent. They reminded me of my teenage self, full of spark, but distracted. That's when I realized talent alone wasn't enough. The routine. I decided to build something I had never had before. Discipline. Every morning, I woke up an hour earlier than necessary. I revised lectures daily, even if I understood nothing at first. I sat in the library until closing time, filling notebooks with practice problems. When others partied, I stayed back to catch up. At first, progress was painfully slow. I failed in small quizzes, misunderstood assignments, and embarrassed myself during presentations. But instead of giving up, I doubled down. My tea-stall days had taught me one thing: consistency is more powerful than bursts of energy. Soon, things began to shift. Professors noticed my effort. Classmates who once ignored me started asking for help with assignments. My marks improved not because I was the smartest, but because I refused to quit. The hustle beyond books. But college wasn't just academics. Money was tight. Fees, books, travel. It was too much for my mother alone, so I hustled. I took odd jobs, tutoring school kids, helping at a stationery shop, even writing assignments for wealthier classmates who didn't want to do the work themselves. Every rupee mattered. I remember counting coins late at night, calculating whether I could afford next semester's textbooks. It was exhausting. Some nights I fell asleep at my desk, face pressed into open books. But strangely, I didn't resent it. The hustle gave me pride. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. The lesson of consistency. By the second year, I had transformed. I wasn't the most talented, but I was reliable. My professors trusted me to lead projects. My friends respected me for my persistence. And slowly, my confidence grew. I realized something profound. Talent gives you a head start, but discipline decides the finish line. The world remembers consistent effort, not flashes of brilliance. A moment of validation. One day, in the middle of my second year, a professor pulled me aside. "I've been watching you," he said. "You're not the sharpest student in this class, but you're the most determined. And that, young man, will take you farther than raw talent ever will." Those words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. For years, I had carried shame about not being the smartest, richest, or most gifted. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need to be. I only needed to be relentless. Lesson from Chapter 4. Discipline beats talent when talent is inconsistent. Success isn't about who starts fastest. It's about who refuses to stop moving forward. Chapter 5. The betrayal of a friend, trust but with wisdom, the comfort of friendship, by the third year of college. Life had found a rhythm. I had built a reputation as the hard-working wonder guy you could count on when deadlines loomed. But amidst the hustle, one of the greatest blessings of that phase was friendship. His name was Rohan. He was everything I wasn't confident. Charming and socially fearless. Where I was cautious, he was bold. Where I struggled with English, he spoke fluently and cracked jokes that made people laugh. We met during a group project. He had been assigned as the team leader, and I expected him to dismiss me, the quiet scholarship kid. But instead, he noticed my effort and said, "Bro, you're the backbone of this team. Without you, we'd be screwed." That simple recognition felt priceless. Soon, we became inseparable, studying together, eating together, even dreaming about the future together. He spoke of starting a company one day, and he promised, "You'll be my co-founder. We'll build something big, just wait." For someone like me, who had grown up craving both belonging and belief, Rohan's friendship was like oxygen. The bond. Rohan came from a well-off family. His father owned a business, and he never had to worry about fees or books. But unlike many privileged kids, he didn't flaunt it. Or at least, I thought he did. He lent me his old phone when mine broke. He insisted on paying for meals sometimes. He introduced me to his circle, proudly calling me the brain of our batch. Slowly, my self-doubt began to fade. With Rohan around, I felt less like the poor boy trying to survive, and more like someone who belonged. The crack appears, but as time passed, small cracks appeared in the friendship. One afternoon, I overheard him telling a joke to others about how I worked at a tea stall as a kid. Everyone laughed. My chest tightened. When I confronted him later, he brushed it off. "Relax, Yar. It's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." I let it go, convincing myself he meant no harm. After all, hadn't he been there for me? Didn't he see me as a brother? But then came the internship applications. We had both applied to the same company, our dream placement. I trusted him completely, even shared my answers with him when we practiced mock interviews. The betrayal. The day of the interview, I noticed something strange. One of the panel's questions was exactly the same as the mock one we had practiced, and Rohan's answer sounded identical to mine. Word for word. At first, I thought it was coincidence. But when the results came, and only he got selected, the truth sank in. My original answers had been polished and presented as his. My trust had become his stepping stone. I confronted him later, anger boiling inside me. "You used me. You took everything I shared and made it yours." He didn't deny it. Instead, he smirked. "Listen, bro. That's how the world works. Everyone looks out for themselves. Don't be naive. If you want to survive, toughen up." His words shattered me. Not because I lost the internship, but because I lost a friend. The one person I thought would always stand by me had turned my trust into betrayal. The aftermath, for weeks, I carried bitterness like a stone in my chest. I replayed every memory with him, questioning if it had all been fake. The laughter, the promises, the brotherhood, was it all a lie? But slowly, with time, I began to see the truth. Rohan hadn't cheated me of success. He had gifted me a harder, more valuable lesson. Not everyone who smiles at you has clean intentions. I learned to separate kindness from naivety, to trust but not blindly, to share but not give away my soul. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that betrayal, painful as it is, doesn't have to harden you into cynicism. It can sharpen you into wisdom. The wisdom, looking back now, I see that Rohan wasn't entirely evil. He was just selfish, driven by ambition without loyalty. And while his betrayal cut deep, it prepared me for the real world, a world where competition and trust constantly collide. The lesson was clear. Trust is precious. Give it, but give it with wisdom. Test character before loyalty. And remember, losing a false friend is better than keeping one who poisons your future. Lesson from Chapter 5. Betrayal teaches you the difference between blind trust and wise trust. Don't close your heart, but do open your eyes. Chapter 6. The corporate rat race. Money isn't everything. The first job, landing my first corporate job, felt like climbing Everest. After years of struggle-tea stalls, late-night study sessions, betrayal, I finally wore a neatly pressed shirt and walked into an office with air conditioning, shiny floors, and people who spoke in polished English. The offer letter promised a salary bigger than anything my family had ever seen. For the first time, I could dream of more than survival. I could imagine paying off debts, buying my mother a new Sorry, maybe even upgrading our leaky roof. The first month's paycheck was intoxicating. I held it in my hands like it was gold. My mother cried when I gave it to her, and for that moment, I believed I had made it. The grind begins, but the shine faded quickly. The office was a machine, and we were its cogs. Mornings began with traffic jams and ended with late-night emails. Deadlines piled up. Bosses barked orders. Colleagues smiled on the outside, but competed fiercely on the inside. At first I didn't mind. I was hungry to prove myself, so I said yes to every task, stayed back longer than anyone else, and worked weekends without complaint. My managers praised me, promotions seemed close, and money flowed steadily. But beneath the applause was a creeping emptiness, the illusion of success with my salary. I began buying things I had once envied in others' brand-name shirts, a sleek phone, fancy dinners. For a while, it felt good. When I returned to my old neighborhood, people whispered, "Look at him, he's made it." But each new purchase lost its thrill faster than the last. The expensive watch didn't fill the quiet. At night, the phone upgrade didn't erase the fatigue in my bones. Even promotions felt hollow, celebrated in the office, forgotten within days. Worse, the job began stealing time from the things that mattered. I missed family gatherings. I stopped calling old friends. My mother often waited late into the night, just to share a meal with me. But I'd come home, too tired to even talk. One night, she said gently, "Beta, I wanted you to succeed so you could live. Not so you could work until you forget what living means." Her words cut deep. The breaking point. The breaking point came during the third year of my job. A big project was assigned to me, a chance to prove myself further. I poured everything into it. Weeks blurred into months of long nights, skipped meals, and endless stress. On the day of the final presentation, My boss took the credit. He smiled at the board, thanking the team, but barely acknowledged me. That evening, as everyone celebrated the project's success, I sat alone in the restroom, staring at the mirror. For the first time, I asked myself, what am I doing this for? The money was good, yes, but my health was breaking, my relationships were fading, and my dreams, the dreams of flying, of building something meaningful, were buried under spreadsheets and PowerPoint slides. The realization, it dawned on me that the corporate world wasn't about passion or growth, it was about survival in a different disguise. Instead of poverty, I was now enslaved by prestige and paychecks. I had traded one rat race for another, and that's when I understood, money is important, but it is not everything. If money costs you your health, your peace, and your relationships, it's not wealth, it's a debt you pay with your life. The shift in perspective. I didn't quit immediately. I wasn't reckless, but I began to make changes. I stopped chasing every extra task for approval. I reconnected with old friends. I made sure to eat dinner with my mother at least a few times a week. I even saved a little money, not for flashy things, but for the future I truly wanted. For the first time, I realized success wasn't about climbing someone else's ladder. It was about building a life you didn't want to escape from. Lesson from Chapter 6. Money is a tool, not a master. Chase stability, not greed. True wealth is measured in time, health, and relationships, not just in paychecks. Chapter 7. Family ties tested. Balancing ambition with relationships. The push for more. By my mid-20s, I had begun to find my footing in the corporate world. The money was steady, promotions were coming, and the lure of climbing higher whispered constantly in my ears. Everyone around me seemed to measure worth by titles and salaries, and I was no different. I told myself I was working this hard for my family, to give my mother comfort, to give my sister opportunities I never had. But slowly, that noble reason became a mask. Underneath, I was also chasing validation, the thrill of proving to the world that the boy from the tea stall had made it. And in that chase, I began neglecting the very people I claimed to be doing it for. The silent sacrifices. My mother, who had once been the center of my evenings, now became a quiet figure I saw in passing. She would ask me to sit for dinner, but I often waved her off, saying, "Later, Ma, I have work." Later never came. My sister, who was preparing for her own board exams, often wanted my help, but I was either too busy or too tired. I gave her money for books, but not time for guidance on weekends. Relatives gathered for weddings or festivals, but I rarely attended. Deadlines, I'd explain. They nodded in sympathy, but their eyes held disappointment. It was as if I was present, in body but absent in spirit. The clash came one evening when my mother confronted me. I had just returned home after midnight, exhausted. She waited at the dining table, her plate untouched. "Beta," she said softly, "when was the last time we ate together?" I sighed, already defensive. "Ma, you know how work is. I'm doing this for us. Don't you want a better life?" She looked at me with tired eyes. A better life is not just a bigger house or money in the bank. A better life is time together. What's the use of success if it steals you from us? Her words hit me harder than any boss's criticism. I wanted to argue, but deep inside, I knew she was right. The missed moments. Over the next months, I started noticing the small things I was missing. My sister scored well in her exams, and I wasn't there to celebrate. my mother's health began to falter, and I hadn't noticed until the doctor mentioned her rising blood pressure. It dawned on me, while I was climbing my career ladder, I was letting my family climb theirs without me. I was giving them money, but not presents, and presents, I realized, was priceless. The turning point. One Sunday, my mother asked me to come with her to the temple. Normally, I would have refused, citing urgent work, but something in her eyes that day made me pause. I agreed. We went together, slowly walking the crowded streets. She held my arm not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. And for the first time in months, I felt like her son again, not just her provider. Afterward, as we shared tea at a roadside stall, she said, "Ambition is good, Beta, but never let it cost the people who matter. Money can always be earned again. Moments cannot." The lesson from that day, I made a silent promise. Work would still matter, I needed it, but I would no longer sacrifice family on its altar. I began scheduling weekly dinners, helping my sister with her studies, and calling my relatives back. It wasn't easy. Deadlines still loomed. Bosses still demanded more. But I learned that true balance wasn't about having unlimited time. It was about making conscious choices with the time I had. The truth became clear. Ambition without balance is emptiness. Success means little if you lose the people who make life worth living. Lesson from Chapter 7. Family is not just part of life, it is life. Don't confuse providing for them with being present for them. Money builds comfort, but presence builds love. Chapter 8. The lowest point, failure, depression, and self-discovery. The fall begins. No one teaches you how to handle failure when you've built your whole identity around winning. For years, I had fought my way upward through poverty, rebellion, heartbreak, and betrayal. Each time, I came out stronger, but nothing prepared me for the blow that came in my late 20s. I had been working tirelessly toward a major promotion. It wasn't just about money, it was about proving myself. Months of sleepless nights, sacrifices, and effort had gone into it. My managers had praised me. My colleagues assumed I was the obvious choice. I believed it too. Then the announcement came. The promotion went to someone else, not because they were better, but because they had connections. A relative on the board. An invisible hand pulling strings. My work, my sweat, my sleepless nights all dismissed with a single decision. The breaking point, that day. Something inside me cracked. I went home, closed the door, and sat in the dark. My mother knocked, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. I felt hollow. For the first time, I questioned everything. Was this all worth it? Had I wasted my youth chasing a dream that wasn't even mine? The days that followed were a blur. I went to work, but my heart wasn't there. I stopped caring about deadlines, stopped laughing at jokes, stopped answering friends' calls. At night, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The energy that had carried me through every hardship before was gone. I wasn't angry, I was numb. Depression's grip. Depression isn't just sadness. It's the slow erosion of willpower. It's the voice whispering, nothing matters anymore. I stopped eating properly. I avoided mirrors because I hated the tired, hollow eyes staring back. Even books, which had once been my refuge, felt meaningless. Worst of all, I withdrew from my family. My mother worried, tried to talk, but I gave her silence. My sister brought me tea, but I barely touched it. Guilt piled on top of despair was failing them too. One night, sitting alone, A terrifying thought entered my mind. Maybe the world would be better off without me. The thought scared me, not because I wanted it, but because I didn't fight it. That was when I knew I had reached rock bottom. The spark of help came from an unexpected place. One evening, an old professor from college called me. "I haven't heard from you in a while," he said. Somehow, he sensed something was wrong. Instead of asking about work, he asked about me. Really asked. And for the first time in months, I spoke honestly. He listened quietly, then said, "Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of it. You've been running so fast that you forgot life isn't just about climbing ladders. It's about building meaning. If one ladder breaks, maybe it wasn't the right one." His words didn't fix me overnight, but they planted a seed. The slow climb back, the journey out of depression was slow. Some days I felt better, other days I slipped back, but I made small changes. I started walking in the mornings, just to feel the sun on my skin. I began journaling, writing out my fears, anger, and questions. I forced myself to eat meals with my mother, even when I had no appetite, and slowly, I noticed something. The world hadn't stopped. The trees still grew, the sun still rose, and my family still loved me. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth holding on to. The discovery. In the stillness of those dark months, I realized something profound. I had been living for achievements, not for myself. My identity was tied to promotions, salaries, and titles. And when those crumbled, I crumbled too. But life was more than a job title. It was in laughter with my sister, quiet talks with my mother, the joy of reading, the peace of walking under the sky. Things I had ignored while chasing success. For the first time, I asked myself, what do I truly want? Not what the world expects, but what gives me meaning. The answer wasn't clear yet, but the question itself was a turning point. Lesson. From Chapter 8, Failure and depression strip away illusions. They force you to confront who you are without achievements. And in that painful mirror, you discover the most important truth. Your worth is not tied to titles, money, or external approval. It is tied to being alive, present, and authentic. Chapter 9. A mentor appears. Power of guidance and humility. The unexpected meeting. I met my mentor at the lowest ebb of my life. By then, I was drifting, working mechanically, surviving each day, but with no spark left. One evening, while attending a seminar forced by my manager, who thought it might motivate the team, I sat at the back, half listening. The speaker was an older man named Mr. Mara, retired entrepreneur who had built and lost companies more than once. At first, I expected clichés, work hard, never give up. But instead, he began with this line: "I failed more times than I succeeded, but every failure gave me the wisdom that no success ever could." Something about that pierced through my numbness. He spoke about how he once went bankrupt, how friends abandoned him, how he thought life was over, and yet, how those moments became the foundation for his later strength. After the talk, while others left, I lingered. I don't know what pushed me, but I walked up to him and asked quietly, "Sir, how do you keep going when everything inside you says stop?" He looked at me for a long moment and said, "You don't keep going for success. You keep going for growth. Success is a byproduct. Growth is the real goal." The beginning of mentorship. That night changed something. I emailed him later, thanking him. To my surprise, he replied. Over the next weeks, He invited me to meet at his office. Unlike the corporate bosses I knew, he didn't sit behind a huge desk or flaunt achievements. He simply asked questions. What do you want out of life? What are you afraid of losing? If you had no pressure from society, what would you choose? At first, I struggled to answer. I realized I had never really thought beyond money, promotions, and reputation. He smiled and said, "That's normal. Most people live without clarity. But humility is the first step admitting you don't know. That's when you begin to learn." The lessons he taught me. Over months, Mr. Mehra became more than a mentor, he became a mirror. He shared his own failures openly, not as shame, but as stories of resilience. From him, I learned 3 truths. Humility is power. Arrogance closes doors, humility opens them. When you admit you don't know everything, people are willing to teach you. Success is seasonal. Money, titles, fame, they come and go like weather. What matters is the skills, character, and resilience you build along the way. Service creates meaning. He often said, the happiest people aren't the richest. They're the ones who add value to others' lives. These ideas were simple, yet revolutionary to me. For years, I had measured myself against others. Who was richer, who was smarter, who had climbed higher. For the first time, I began to see life as an inward journey, not just an outward race. The challenge, but Mr. Mehra didn't just give advice, he challenged me. One day, he said, stop being just a survivor. Test yourself. Start something of your own, even if small. Build discipline not for your boss, but for yourself. The thought terrified me. Start something. Me, the boy who once carried tea trays. But, he insisted, don't wait for the perfect time. Growth begins when you step into the unknown. With his encouragement, I began taking small steps. I volunteered for projects outside my comfort zone. I started reading not just for work, but for wisdom books on psychology, leadership, even spirituality. Slowly, my perspective widened. The humility breakthrough, one of the most powerful moments, came when I admitted to him, "Sir, I'm scared. I've always worked hard, but I still feel like that poor boy who doesn't belong." He looked at me kindly and said, "Good. Never forget that boy. He will keep you grounded. The day you think you've made it is the day you stop growing." That lesson stayed with me forever. The turning of the tide. With his guidance, I didn't just recover from depression, I began to transform. I was no longer obsessed with just promotions or paychecks. I began focusing on becoming skilled, becoming valuable, and helping others when I could. For the first time, I felt a sense of direction beyond survival. I was still far from my ultimate purpose, but I was no longer lost. Mentorship taught me that sometimes you don't need someone to give you answers. You need someone to ask you the right questions. Lesson from Chapter 9. A true mentor doesn't just teach. They awaken humility and guide you toward your own strength. Guidance is not about shortcuts, it's about clarity, patience, and growth. Chapter 10. Finding purpose, choosing impact over success. The seed of purpose. By the time I was 30, I had something I once thought impossible: stability. The boy who once scrubbed cups at a tea stall now wore formals, earned a decent income, and had the respect of colleagues. But even as the external world looked successful, inside, I wrestled with a question my mentor had planted in me. What gives your life meaning? I thought about it constantly. At first, I assumed meaning came from climbing higher in the corporate ladder. But the more promotions I saw, the more hollow it felt. Each title gave pride for a week, then dissolved into routine. So what was left? The answer came unexpectedly. From looking backwards at my own struggles, a memory revisited. One afternoon, while cleaning my room, I found an old, crumpled notebook. Inside were doodles and scribbles from my teenage years' dreams about flying. Planes, sketches of big goals, even motivational quotes I had copied from books. Flipping through those pages, I felt a pang. I remembered being that boy hungry, determined, but with no one to guide me. My teachers tried, yes, but poverty and survival drowned so many of my ambitions. That's when it struck me. What if I could be the guide I once needed? The small start. I didn't make a grand announcement or quit my job. I simply began small. On weekends, I started tutoring underprivileged kids in my neighborhood. At first it was just 2 children, the son of a rickshaw driver and the daughter of a vegetable vendor. They came with torn notebooks, shy smiles, and eyes full of the same hunger I once had. I taught them math, English, and science, but more than that, I shared stories about resilience, about not giving up, about how education could open doors. To my surprise, I found myself more energized in those hours than in my entire week at work. Their progress, their laughter, their belief, it filled me in ways no paycheck ever had. The inner shift, the more I taught, the more I realized purpose wasn't in impressing bosses or buying things I didn't need. Purpose was in impact, leaving people better than you found them. Every time a child solved a problem and looked at me with pride, I felt a joy deeper than any corporate bonus. My mother noticed too. One evening, she said, "Beta, you look happiest when you're with those children. Maybe this is what you were meant for." Her words echoed what my heart already knew. Clashes with the old. Life, but purpose and ambition rarely walk hand in hand without friction. My office workload grew heavier, and balancing both worlds became hard. Some colleagues mocked me for wasting time teaching poor kids instead of networking. Even inside, I battled doubts. Am I throwing away my career? Can I afford to spend so much energy on something that doesn't pay? But every time I sat with those children, the doubts melted. I remembered my mentor's words. Success is seasonal. Impact is eternal. A defining moment. One day, one of the kids I taught, the rickshaw driver's son, ran up to me with a wide smile. "Baya, I came first in my class. My father says he's never been this proud." I looked at his glowing face and realized this was it. This was the meaning I had been searching for. Not applause in boardrooms, not money in bank accounts, but changing lives, even in small ways. The bigger vision. From then on, I made a quiet vow. No matter where life took me, I would dedicate part of myself to helping others rise. My success would not just be measured by what I earned, but by how many I lifted along the way. And in that vow, I discovered freedom. Purpose is not about what you achieve for yourself. It's about what you contribute to others. Lesson from Chapter 10. Success fades, but impact lasts. True purpose is found not in chasing applause, but in leaving footprints that guide others forward. Chapter 11. Building again, resilience and patience, the first step towards something bigger. Purpose without action is just a dream. After months of teaching children in my neighborhood, I knew I wanted to do more. The 2 kids had grown into 6, then 12. Word spread quickly among parents who couldn't afford tutors. Suddenly, My small weekend effort looked like the beginning of something larger, but with growth came challenges. My room was too small for the group. Some children couldn't even afford notebooks. Parents asked if I could also teach girls, many of whom were being pulled out of school early. And while my heart wanted to say yes to everything, my time and resources were limited. That's when the lesson of patience entered. The clash of two worlds, balancing a demanding corporate job with this side mission, was exhausting. Weekdays belonged to deadlines, weekends to teaching, nights to planning. Some colleagues laughed. "Are you trying to run a school?" Others warned me, "Careful, you'll burn out." And sometimes they were right. There were days I wanted to quit, days when fatigue screamed louder than purpose. But then one of the children would smile and say, "Baya, I passed because of you." And suddenly the fire returned. Resilience wasn't about never getting tired, was about remembering why you started when exhaustion tempted you to stop. The small failures, not every attempt worked. I tried convincing a local shopkeeper to donate books. He laughed me out of his store. I tried setting up a study camp in the community hall. No one showed up the first day. Some kids dropped out after a few weeks, pulled back into work by their families. Each failure stung. At times, I wondered if I was foolish to think I could make a difference. But my mentor's voice echoed in my mind. Failure is feedback, not the end. Learn, adjust, try again. So I did. I learned to start small, to celebrate progress instead of perfection, and to keep moving forward even if only one child showed up. The turning point, one evening, while teaching under a flickering bulb, I noticed Rahul, the boy who once came last in class, helping a younger student solve a math problem. He explained patiently, the way I had explained to him months ago. That moment struck me deeply. Impact was multiplying. It wasn't just me lifting them, it was them lifting each other. I realized then that true building wasn't about structures or organizations. It was about planting seeds of self-belief in others so they could carry the torch forward. The lesson of patience. The biggest struggle wasn't the lack of money or space, it was my own impatience. I wanted results fast, visible, dramatic. But change, I learned, grows slowly. Children stumbled, parents resisted, society doubted. Yet, with every small victory, a passed exam, a girl convincing her father to let her stay in school, understood the truth. Real change is built brick by brick, not overnight. Patience is the mortar that holds resilience together. The quiet satisfaction. By the end of that year, I hadn't built a grand institution. There were no headlines, no awards, no recognition. But a dozen children were learning, dreaming, and believing in themselves, because someone refused to give up on them. And that quiet satisfaction was worth more than any corporate bonus I had ever received. Lesson from Chapter 11, Building. Something meaningful requires resilience to endure failures and patience to wait for growth. Change isn't instant, but every small step compounds into something larger than you imagined. Chapter 12, The Turning Point. A decision that changes everything. The crossroads. By my early 30s, my life was split in two. On one side was the corporate world's steady paycheck, promotions, respectability. On the other side was my growing side mission, a small but passionate effort to teach underprivileged kids, which was quietly becoming the core of my identity. But living in both worlds was becoming impossible. Work demanded longer hours, bigger commitments, and constant sacrifices. Meanwhile, the children needed more structure, more resources, more of me. I stood at a crossroads, and for months I avoided the decision. Fear whispered, what if you fail? What if you give up stability and end up with nothing? But another voice inside me asked a different question. What if you succeed? What if this is the very reason life took you through so many struggles to prepare you for this? The breaking moment. The decision came unexpectedly. One evening, my boss called me into his office. He was impressed with my recent project and offered me a major promotion, a managerial role, bigger salary, bigger team. On paper, it was everything I had worked for. Yet as he spoke, my mind wandered not to the money, not to the title, but to Rahul, the rickshaw driver's son, who had just told me days earlier that he wanted to become an engineer. I remembered the girl who had fought with her father to stay in school. Their faces flashed before me, and suddenly I knew. I politely declined the promotion. My boss was stunned. Do you understand what you're saying? This is your career. I smiled weakly and said, Sir, it's not my career I want to build anymore, it's my purpose, the leap. Quitting wasn't easy. My mother worried. Beta, are you sure? You worked so hard to get here. I hugged her and said, Ma, I worked so hard to survive. Now I want to work to live. With her reluctant blessing, I resigned. I pooled my savings, rented a small room, and officially started a community learning center. It wasn't fancy, just a chalkboard, a few desks, and second-hand books, but it was real. It was mine. The day we opened, only 10 kids showed up, but I felt like I had built a temple. The storm of doubts, the early days were tough. Money ran short. Quickly, some relatives called me foolish. Former colleagues pitied me, whispering he threw away his career. And yes, some nights I lay awake, wondering if they were right. But every morning, when I saw children eager to learn, those doubts melted dots slowly. Support began trickling in. A local stationery shop donated notebooks. A retired teacher volunteered to help. Parents who had once been skeptical started sending more kids. The center grew not because of me alone, but because the community began to believe in it. The lesson of boldness, that decision to quit the secure path and follow purpose, became the turning point of my life. It was terrifying, risky, and uncertain, but it taught me the most powerful truth. Life doesn't change with slow compromise. It changes when you take bold steps in the direction of meaning. Even when the world calls you crazy, the first taste of fulfillment. One evening, as the children packed up their bags, Rahul lingered behind. He handed me a small, handwritten note. It read, Baya, one day I'll make you proud. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Tears filled my eyes. In that moment, I knew with absolute clarity had made the right choice. Lesson from Chapter 12. The biggest turning points in life are born from bold decisions. Security feels safe, but purpose feels alive. And when you choose purpose, even the smallest victories carry infinite meaning. Chapter 13. Giving back, legacy, kindness, and teaching others. The years that followed, what began as a small weekend tutoring effort slowly transformed into a full-fledged learning center. Over the years, children came and went, some stayed. Only for months, others for years. But each carried a spark with them. I watched Rahul, the rickshaw driver's son, grow into a determined young man. True to his promise, he worked relentlessly, earned scholarships, and eventually got into an engineering college. When he sent me his admission letter, I cried as if it were my own victory. The vegetable vendor's daughter, once pulled out of school at 13, returned after convincing her father that education was her weapon. Years later, she became a teacher herself. Each success was a reminder. I hadn't chosen the easy path, but I had chosen the right one. The ripple effect. The most beautiful part was watching the ripple effect. Many of the children I once taught came back to volunteer at the center. They became mentors for the younger kids, passing forward the same belief I had once given them. It was no longer my mission. It would become a community's mission. And that, I realized, was legacy, not building something that dies with you, but planting seeds that grow long after you're gone. The return of the past. One day, years later, I received an unexpected message. It was from Aditya, the girl from my teenage years, my first love and first loss. She had heard about the work I was doing through mutual friends. Her message was simple. I always knew you'd do something meaningful. I'm proud of you. Reading it, I smiled. Life had come full circle. The season of her presence in my life had ended long ago, but the lesson of impermanence had led me here to a purpose bigger than heartbreak. The reflection as I entered my 40s. I often reflected on the boy I once was, the child wiping cups at the tea stall, the rebellious teen, the ambitious corporate worker, the lost young man at rock bottom. If I could speak to that boy now, I would tell him, every struggle will make sense. Every pain will shape you. Don't rush to escape the storms. They are carving you into who you're meant to become. The greatest lesson, what I learned above all, is this. Life is not about what you take, it's about what you give. Money fades, success fades, even people fade. But kindness endures. Impact endures. Legacy endures. We enter this world with nothing and leave with nothing. The only thing that remains is how we touched the lives around us. The Circle of Gratitude. On the 10th anniversary of the Learning Center, the children, now young adults, organized a small celebration. They decorated the humble room with paper, flowers, and wrote messages on the wall. Thank you, Baya, for believing in us. As I stood there, surrounded by the laughter of dozens of young voices, I realized something profound. This was my true wealth. Not the salary slips I once chased, not the titles I once craved, but the love, gratitude, and impact I had sown. In that moment, I felt complete. Final lesson from chapter 13. The true measure of life is not success, but significance. Not how high you climb, but how many you lift. Give back, for in giving, you discover the deepest form of living. Epilogue, the story's lesson. This journey from poverty to rebellion, from heartbreak to discovery, from failure to purpose teaches one timeless truth, life's greatest turning point is when you stop asking, what can I get? And start asking, what can I give? And that's the end of the Turning Pointer story of resilience, mistakes, love, betrayal, purpose, and legacy.